We're following reaction tonight to a stunning new interview President Trump just gave on North Korea, threatening to deal with the North Korean nuclear threat with or without the help of China. Now, earlier today, the president told the Financial Times, quote, well, if China is not going to solve North Korea, we will. And this is tough talk coming just days before Trump hosts Chinese President Xi Jinping for his Florida resort, and it'll be their first face-to-face meeting. Let's bring in CNN Global Affairs correspondent Elise Labott, who's on assignment in Jerusalem. Elise, thanks for making time for us. How does this interview with the Financial Times set the table, so to speak, for these important talks? Is this as big of a deal as it seems?
Well, Anna, you know that President Trump is a real tough talker, and I think this is kind of his opening gambit. This is kind of similar, if you will, to what Secretary of State Rex Tillerson did on the road on the eve of his meeting with President Xi in Beijing from South Korea. He was talking about that North Korea policy of the last 20 years, what we've called strategic patience, wasn't working. And so I think President Trump is sending a signal to the Chinese that the U.S. wants China to use its considerable leverage on North Korea. And if it doesn't, the U.S., as he said, will go it alone. Now, what could that mean? It could obviously mean a preemptive strike. It could mean some kind of covert action, such as a cyber action, but it could also mean more sanctions. And what we're talking about is really what they call secondary sanctions, which are sanctions on Chinese companies, and the Chinese know this very well, Chinese companies that are doing business with North Korea. And certainly that was a message that Secretary Tillerson warned the Chinese about when he was there. And so I think President Trump in this interview is saying there's a lot of pressure we could put on China to make sure that they're playing ball, Anna.
President Trump is going to put China on notice, supposedly, over North Korea's nuclear program. How will tough talk work ahead of the high-stakes meeting with China's president this week? CNN's Will Ripley has reported extensively from inside North Korea. He joins us now from Beijing with reaction. We're told the meeting will be at Mar-a-Lago later this week, but will not involve golf, at least not for China's president, right?
That's right, because he's actually banned all government officials from playing golf here in China and has shut down a number of golf courses. He's almost waged a war against the sport here. So an interesting backdrop, but they certainly do have a lot on their agenda, Chris. This interview with President Trump, where he said that the United States will take care of North Korea with or without China. Chinese officials not taking the bait on that, at least in their public statements overnight. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that there was a conversation that happened between Secretary of State Tillerson and China's top diplomat, queuing up this meeting, talking about its importance, but not even mentioning the subject of North Korea. Of course, China blames the United States for escalating tensions on the Korean Peninsula. The U.S. thinks that China has a lot of economic leverage that it's not using. What could the U.S. actually do in North Korea? Well, it's certainly limited without China's participation, Chris, because any sanctions, for them to really be effective, China would need to enforce them. If there was some sort of diplomatic engagement directly with the U.S. and North Korea, as President Trump hinted on the campaign trail, that would certainly be unprecedented. The other option, and again, the president's comments very cryptic, a preemptive military strike, that is certainly something that would cause a lot of problems for China and not something that they want to see happen.
The reason they get immunity is because they did something wrong. They didn't do anything wrong. They don't think in terms of immunity.
President Trump last year attacking Hillary Clinton's aides for receiving immunity in the investigation into her private email server. He is obviously singing a different tune now that his former national security advisor, retired General Michael Flynn, is apparently asking for immunity as well before he would testify to the FBI or before Congress on Russian meddling in the election. Trump calls the investigation a witch hunt. We have lots to talk about here with our panel. We have with us Republican Congressman Jason Lewis of Minnesota, Neera Tanden, President and CEO of the Center for American Progress, Nina Turner, former Democratic Ohio State Senator, and Mike Rogers, former Republican Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. So, Congressman Lewis, let me just start with you. Immunity meant one thing last year, and it means something else this year. There's even obviously bites of Mike Flynn saying you don't ask for immunity unless you committed a crime.
Well, I think they're trying to get to the bottom of the story. If that helps, it helps. I'll tell you, if I were to go in front of a congressional panel, though, you don't have judicial oversight in a congressional testimony. And so telling somebody they ought to get immunity when you're going in front of Congress is probably the smart legal thing to do.
Your face says you're skeptical of that.
I'm sorry. I think the idea that Mike Flynn is asking for immunity tells us there's something deep and seriously wrong here. Obviously, last week we learned there was an FBI investigation. We have now 20 points of contacts between Russians and the Trump the Trump campaign and Trump associates.
Contact is not collusion, of course.
It's not collusion.
According to James Clapper, it's not collusion.
I would just say that I worked on plenty of presidential campaigns. I never, ever met with Russians, Russian assets, Russian government officials. There's a lot here, and Devin Nunes' behavior demonstrates that the House Intel Committee seems incapable of doing it. And so that's why I think lots of Democrats are asking for an independent commission. And I have to say, I do not understand why Republicans keep trying to block that.
Because there's 3 investigations going on here. There's the FBI, there's the Senate Intelligence Committee of the Richard Burr and John Warner, and there's the House Intelligence Committee. And the only thing we know is Flynn's contacts. James Clapper said there's no evidence of collusion whatsoever. Let's let the investigation.
James Clapper doesn't know that. He said that
the former
before
director of
the
DNI
FBI.
on January 20th.
He said, as of the time he left the government,
That's
January
right.
20th, he didn't know of it.
But the FBI has a current investigation.
That's right.
And
Let's go to
let him do it.
an independent commission is a way for us publicly to see that.
You're the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, so let me ask you, what do you make of the request for immunity by General Flynn's lawyer?
Well, there's 2 sides of that story. One is, if you're going to testify before Congress, the way that the statute works for lying to an FBI agent, it's called a 101 violation, what was it, 1001 violation, you would want to make sure that if you said something there, even inadvertently, it might not jive with what you told the FBI. You don't want to get in that mess if you wanted to come out and testify.
Because that's how the FBI squeezes people.
That's how the FBI squeezes you. I would say, listen, if I were the committees, I wouldn't grant immunity. And the other thing I would stop doing is having all of this public attention to an investigation. If this is really an investigation, everybody needs to clam up, candidly, including the president. Stop talking about it. I mean, the most dangerous place in Washington, D.C. right now is between a congressman who has read a classified report and a microphone. That needs to stop. And it's both sides. I just heard Adam Schiff this morning saying, well, we can't talk about that. But, boy, people are guilty of something. He's supposed to be the person helping lead an investigation for a conclusion. You can't go into this thinking you have a conclusion.
He's saying because there's no evidence, we need more investigation.
I think they all need to stop talking.
I mean, there may be something there, Jake. It might not be. But the fact that General Flynn criticized Clinton aides, you know, and saying that you're guilty if you ask for immunity, well, he just asked for immunity, so maybe he's guilty. But it's not just the Democrats that are asking for an independent investigator. Q&PAC poll just recently showed that 2 out of 3 Americans believe that there should be an independent investigation. So
you Ohioans like to cite polling. Congressman Jordan.
Are you linking me and Congressman Jordan?
You both like polls. That's all I'm saying. You both like the poll numbers. Speaking of President Trump and tweeting, he just tweeted this morning, maybe he was watching State of the Union. The real story turns out to be surveillance and leaking. Find the leakers. And you heard Congressman Schiff say this is the whole point as President Trump is trying to change the subject from any possible collusion, focus on the leaking.
I think there's 3 pretty distinct issues here that they need to get to the bottom of. I do think that the leaking is serious. You cannot have FISA material, which is the most sensitive collection.
Foreign intelligence
surveillance. It's very sensitive. If there was cause to have this information broadly distributed and leaked, that's a crime. That's a separate investigation in my mind. The FBI should do that. That sounds like a criminal action.
Yeah,
but the other 2, this is important. Then there's one on Russia. This is where the committees could stay out of the way. The fact that the Russians are engaged in information operations here and around the world with our allies is a serious matter. If they could help the public understand their intentions and their capabilities, this would go a long way in the public. So you have those 3 different issues that are really important, really. And this the whole thing, I mean, this is when you want your government to be a lot more like James Bond than you do Austin Powers. Yeah. The problem here is it looks like the last.
Speaking of Austin Powers, Devin Nunes has actually been part of the problem, which is, I mean, what you're saying is that we shouldn't have this public discussion, and he's been out in front of reporters, and it turns out that he misled a lot of reporters over the last several weeks. And that's another reason why people think Republicans, the House Intelligence Committee, should not be holding this.
You like the whistleblowers when they say Trump did this or that with the Russians, but a whistleblower came to the chairman and said, look, we've had information that incidental collection has captured U.S. citizens.
The whistleblower at the White House?
He went to the White House.
He went to the White House and got the information
from the White
House staffers.
Which is routine information when you go to classified information. That's where you get it on
Okay, are you
executive
calling
grounds.
the White House staff who were hired by the president
saying-
whistleblowers?
No,
Is that
no.
what you're saying?
I'm saying Nunes got information that, and it's now proven with a former Obama aide who said we had to collect the intelligence before Trump get in
No,
there.
you're dead.
What aide?
That's
What
false.
intelligence?
What you're saying does not make it. If you're referencing Elizabeth Farkas, that's not what she said. And actually,
Oh, I'll
Devin
tell you what
Nunes,
she said. No, I'll tell you
hold
what
on.
she said.
Devin Nunes went to the White House, got information from 3 staffers, and that's what he claimed was his information.
and what
those
is-
3
yep.
staffers, I don't know why they couldn't
And
brief
where
the
did we get-
president directly
And
himself.
where did we get the information on Russian collusion?
The FBI is investigating the Russian collusion
but
right
how,
now.
how did it make it to the public sphere? Where did that
Because
information
the
come from?
House Intelligence Committee had
Well,
had
no,
Comey
well,
testify.
I think the
That is
point.
why.
Well, here's a question for you, Nira. So
No, you're wrong.
No, Comey was testifying.
So I think one of the points, and again, that's not to say that we should change the subject and stop focusing at all on possible
Although that
Russian
is
collusion.
correct.
But let me ask this. If there was surveillance of the Russian ambassador, Kislyak, and that did pick up this conversation with General Flynn, in which he was supposedly talking about sanctions or something, and then that was spread throughout the government. His name was unmasked, meaning that it was still within confidential government information, but it was unmasked. It said General Flynn instead of Citizen A. And then the Washington Post broke that story, in which I think was attributed to 8 or 9 government sources, saying that Flynn had had this conversation. It was a big blockbuster. That would be potentially a crime.
Yes, so here's what I think.
The leaking of his name.
I think the reason that happened is because Mike Flynn lied, right? So the question is, when Mike Flynn and the vice president lied to the American people about what Mike Flynn did, is it whistleblowing? Is it leaking? It may be both. So I'm perfectly comfortable getting to the bottom of that, as long as Republicans are perfectly comfortable to have a process that people have faith in. And I have to say, people do not have faith in Devin Nunes after the debacle of the last 2 weeks.
Would you have done anything differently as House Intelligence Chairman? You were obviously chairman of the committee. You had sources who were whistleblowers. You disagreed with your Democratic counterpart. Would you have handled it differently than the way Congressman Nunes did?
Completely, candidly. First of all, I was in a highly charged political investigation.
Sure, Benghazi.
Benghazi. Ours, and we did a lot of other really good investigations as well. So we came to some common ground rules on how to do this investigation that was going to be facts and facts-based only for our lane, which was only intelligence. People wanted us to get into the State Department, wasn't our gig. They wanted us to get into DOD, wasn't our gig. So we came up with our ground rules to do our investigation into the intelligence piece of that. The point of that was we didn't have press conferences about it. We didn't run out every time we got a new document and say this happened or that happened. And my ranking member never went out in the press and said we should find these conclusions in the investigation, just like I never went out and said we should find these conclusions in the investigations. I think it's when the government does an investigation of any sort, it's serious. You're talking about people's character, maybe their freedom, right? They could go to jail. You need to take that as serious as it is. It is no place for sharp-edged partisan politics.
Nina, are you
because people's reputations are at risk.
Are you concerned at all that Democrats, liberals, progressives are expecting this investigation to go someplace that ultimately it might not? That ultimately it might turn up, oh, this aide did something and he gets some small fine, and that's really all that the FBI and the intelligence committees can find?
Well, the congressman should recuse himself at this point.
Nunes.
That's Nunes. He should recuse himself so we can bring back some integrity to this investigation. And to your question, there might be something there, they might not. I hope that Democrats, liberals, and or progressives are not putting all of their faith in the fact that something might be there. It might not, but that's why we need an investigation and we need an independent investigation.
And the ranking member should quit going on television and saying we don't have any evidence, therefore this is what the president did.
Well,
he just said that half an hour ago.
Beginning of an investigation.
I mean,
obviously, people have been saying there's nothing here. Then we find out the FBI has a current counterintelligence investigation
This is
going
part
on.
of the problem, though, Jake. I mean, Jesus Christ, can we focus in on anything other than Russia? American people need some other stuff.
I'm glad you said that. Let me bring in Ivanka Trump. That's not what you meant. Ivanka Trump is officially a White House employee this week. Take a listen to her dad talking about her new role.
The Chancellor of Germany is going to has asked Ivanka to go to Germany, and she'll be working on similar issues with Chancellor Merkel.
What do you think?
I mean, what's next? A wealthy young president hiring his 35-year-old brother with no legal experience as Attorney General? I mean, what's it coming to?
The Kennedys.
This is much ado about nothing. I mean, they're following the ethics rules. They're taking no salary. That's fine.
I think it's interesting that we have a situation in which Ivanka Trump has holdings, including into the Trump Hotel. Jared Kushner has $700 million worth of holdings. The traditional thing to do here is to actually divest.
Right. I think Kushner has divested a lot, I think, according to the documents released on Friday. Ivanka has not.
She has not divested at all. He has not divested from a lot of assets, including buildings. You saw that he's not divested from a company that has tried to do business with the Chinese.
Yeah.
The president is meeting with this week. Who the president is meeting with this week. I think the issue here is it's odd to say you're going to have a campaign that drains the swamp when the president refuses to take the lines himself and his family refuses to take those lines.
I think we need an investigation there.
Thanks, one and all.
All right, Matthew Chance, stand by in Moscow. I want to bring in CNN terrorism analyst Paul Cruikshank, who is here with us in New York. And Paul, Russia as a target of terror, if that is what this turns out to be, why?
Russia is now arguably the top target for global jihadis. Al-Qaeda and ISIS, a target even higher in the pecking order than the United States. And that's because they've launched all these airstrikes in Syria, which have killed so many Sunni Muslim civilians there. This has deeply angered the global jihadi movement, but it's also massively energized the global jihadi movement. According to Vladimir Putin, up to 7,000 Russian nationals, people from the former Soviet bloc countries, have traveled to Syria and Iraq, joined groups like ISIS, and the worry is that they're now coming back into Russia to launch attacks. Particularly concerned about people from the Caucasus region of Russia joining groups like ISIS. They've emerged as some of the fiercest fighters in ISIS, and they were responsible, fighters from the Russian Caucasus, for that Istanbul airport attack back last summer. So a concern of a new wave of terrorism now hitting Russia as blowback for their intervention in Syria.
And the White House clearly not listening because they don't want to. Dan Scavinos, who's the president's social media director, used his personal account yesterday to attack another member, Justin Amash of Michigan, who responded in kind on Twitter, saying Trump admin and establishment have merged into Trump establishment. Same old agenda, attack conservatives, libertarians, and independent thinkers. We are 1 month from 100 days. Their first big legislative effort blew up, repealing and replacing Obamacare. There's a government shutdown coming up. There's then passing the Trump budget coming up. There's immigration decisions coming up. Can the president succeed if he's at war, not just having differences with conservatives, but saying, I'm going to come to your state next year and support a primary opponent?
No, I mean, he can't, especially in some of these. Justin Amash's district is a little bit different than the other three members, because in Jim Jordan's district, Raul Labrador's district, and Mark Meadows' district, you could probably run a cardboard cutout that said Republican on it, and they would win those districts, because they're solidly Republican districts. So they don't feel like they need the president. And Justin Amash...
Can you get to their right in a primary?
That would be, and that's the other thing. Good luck trying to find someone to the right of Jim Jordan.
Right. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe most of the Freedom Caucus members have ran ahead
slightly
of Trump,
ahead,
right?
Yeah.
But you never know what happens in a coordinated, intensive campaign that Donald Trump is leading, supporting a primary opponent. Who knows, right? And I do think it is interesting that he has identified the Freedom Caucus as the problem. There was some confusion after the health care bill failed over whether he was going to blame Paul Ryan or he was going to blame the Freedom Caucus. Now they seem to be on the same. The White House seems to be very coordinated and saying, all right, it's these guys that are a threat to our agenda and they need to be disciplined.
They're trying to show, and there was a lot of discussion about this when the health care bill failed, that there did need to be some, you had Mark Short, the president's legislative affairs guy, and you had Steve Bannon, his chief strategist, and a few other people in the administration making clear that they wanted to know who the no votes were so that they could essentially have the option of holding people accountable. And there is still a view by some in that White House that you need to make an example of people to show them that you cannot cross the president. And that is logical. Look, this would hardly be the first White House that would do that. But the Trump White House is so not operating from a position of strength right now. When you were at 35%, you are not really scaring anybody. And what Trump had at 35% approval ratings for the president, what Trump had before was the ability to scare people and intimidate them. And when that goes, I mean, essentially what we saw with the AHCA fight, the president blinked. And these guys know it, and you're seeing that on Twitter.
And you also had a bill that had 17% approval rating, so that gave them an out, saying, look at this, everyone hates this.
And they for years, ran on specifics. these House members, and this bill did not. There was no surprise. It should not have, and they've also moved the goalpost many times in debates with Speaker Boehner, former Speaker Boehner. So it shouldn't have been a surprise. To the point you make about a 35% approval rating. We're a month from the 100-day mark. Again, there's the big debate in this town and out in America, and they might be different debates, is how's he doing, right? And so Marist McClatchy poll this week, grade the president. Do it A, never mind polling numbers, but A, 15%, B, 22%, C, 15%. If you consider C a passing grade, a majority gives him a passing grade, D, 15%, F, 32%. That would be your hardcore Democrats at the bottom there. It's an interesting way to look at it.
There's something that happened at the White House on Friday, and you were present for it, and it was really curious. Let me just show it. The president was supposed to sign these executive orders on trade. Take a listen.
Thank you, everybody. You're going to see some very, very strong results very, very quickly. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, today with your tweet, were you trying to tell the Justice Department to grant immunity to Michael Flynn? Were you trying to do that, Mr. President? Was that your intention, Mr. President, sir?
Thank you, President.
Mr. President, was that your intention, Mr. President? Was that your intention, sir?
This is a very curious moment. You see Vice President Pence at the end there go over there and try to tell him he forgot to sign the executive orders. President Trump says, you know, bring them into the other room, I'll sign them there. Is there anyone in the president's inner circle who's willing to tell him when he's making a mistake?
Well, as to the signing of the orders, he did sign the orders. I was there with him in the anteroom when he signed them, and in fact, he gave me the pen that he used to sign the order most directly relevant to the Department of Commerce. So I don't see where the term mistake comes from.
Well, it was supposed to be he was supposed to sign them before the cameras. It was a ceremony, and he ended up walking out before he signed them, which I'm sure was just an honest mistake, or maybe he didn't want to answer Major Garrett's question about immunity and Michael Flynn. But in any case, it just all looked rather odd, and it also just raises the question, is there anybody who can tell the president when he's wrong?
Well, I don't see what he did that's wrong. It's his decision where he wants to sign an order. He did sign the order. It's official. That's the relevant fact. Whether it pleased some particular cameraman or not is of no concern.
There's something that happened at the White House on Friday, and you were present for it, and it was really curious. Let me just show it. The president was supposed to sign these executive orders on trade. Take a listen.
Thank you, everybody. You're going to see some very, very strong results very, very quickly. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, today with your tweet, were you trying to tell the Justice Department to grant immunity to Michael Flynn? Were you trying to do that, Mr. President? Was that your intention, Mr. President, sir?
Thank you, President.
Mr. President, was that your intention, Mr. President? Was that your intention, sir?
This is a very curious moment. You see Vice President Pence at the end there go over there and try to tell him he forgot to sign the executive orders. President Trump says, you know, bring them into the other room, I'll sign them there. Is there anyone in the president's inner circle who's willing to tell him when he's making a mistake?
Well, as to the signing of the orders, he did sign the orders. I was there with him in the anteroom when he signed them, and in fact, he gave me the pen that he used to sign the order most directly relevant to the Department of Commerce. So I don't see where the term mistake comes from.
Well, it was supposed to be he was supposed to sign them before the cameras. It was a ceremony, and he ended up walking out before he signed them, which I'm sure was just an honest mistake, or maybe he didn't want to answer Major Garrett's question about immunity and Michael Flynn. But in any case, it just all looked rather odd, and it also just raises the question, is there anybody who can tell the president when he's wrong?
Well, I don't see what he did that's wrong. It's his decision where he wants to sign an order. He did sign the order. It's official. That's the relevant fact. Whether it pleased some particular cameraman or not is of no concern.
It's baseball's opening day, and experts are watching to see if the Cubs will go for another historic World Series win. Celebrities and politicians will be on hand to celebrate America's pastime, with one notable exception.
Take me out to the ball game.
Not this year. President Trump declined the Washington Nationals' invitation to throw out the ceremonial first pitch on opening day. He cited scheduling conflicts. A surprising decision from the new commander-in-chief, who discovered America's pastime long before he discovered the boardroom.
Did you always know you were going to go into this business?
No, I wanted to be a baseball player.
That was no childhood fantasy. Trump was a star player at the New York Military Academy. His coach told Rolling Stone he was once even scouted by the Phillies.
I was captain of the baseball team. I was supposed to be a professional baseball player. Fortunately, I decided to go into real estate instead.
He's already stepped up to the mound for the Cubs, the Red Sox, and his beloved Yankees. But even the leader of the free world apparently gets nervous when he goes into his windup. George H.W. Bush, a college baseball star at Yale, was visibly upset after a wide pitch at Orioles opening day in 1992. Bill Clinton took note and tried to avoid the same fate in 1996.
I practiced for a week before then. I went out and I paced off the distance in the backyard of the White House. Most of my practice pitches were much better. I think I was a little nervous.
One of George W. Bush's most unforgettable moments as president came at the 2001 World Series in New York, just weeks after the attacks on America.
The gravity of the moment never really hit me until the first step coming out of that dugout. Standing on the mound at Yankee Stadium was by far the most nervous moment of my presidency.
So in this long history of presidential pitches started by Taft, how will Trump stack up? Well, perhaps we'll find out next season.
Play ball.